What's up, guys, and welcome back to another episode on my new YouTube podcast on the Idaho 4. On today's episode, I want to circle back to this alternate perpetrator theory and really hone in on some of the forensic psychology and the physical evidence and what happened to these victims both during and after the attacks. And what does that tell us about these attacks? Does it suggest a targeted attack of all four victims or this solo random thrill kill? I did want to preface this entire segment with a trigger warning. A couple of the topics I'm going to be talking about today with regards to the victims are quite sensitive in nature. They're not meant to offend anyone. There is a trigger warning, so you can opt out now. Before we get into it, I wanted to give credit where credit's due. A lot of the intel that I'm going to be talking about today comes from this book. Most of you are familiar with Broken Plea. If you haven't read it, I recommend go out, get a copy, and read it. And thank you, Mr. Christopher Whitcomb. So let's get into it. As we know, the sole assailant theory is one person entered that home with one weapon. We know the defense theory at trial arguably was going to be a multiple assailants and multiple weapon theory. We now know from autopsy photographs, the defense believed that there were at least three different types of edged weapons involved in these attacks. So we're talking presumably four assailants and four weapons. So right off the bat, that tells me the defense believed, they absolutely believed that this was a targeted attack of these four victims. So when we're talking about 2 a.m., we're thinking that sometime after 2 a.m., these four assailants with their four weapons entered 1122 King in a blitz type formation. Presumably, two went up to Madison's room, two went into Xana's room. And we know that because the DNA cross contamination of these attacks tells us that they were fairly contained and separate attacks. We know there was no Kaylee or Madison blood found in Xana and Ethan's room, and vice versa. And if this is how it went down, and that's how I believe it went down, that shows clear planning and premeditation, and that there was a group of people that were after these four victims. Let's talk about the two separate attacks. We know that Kaylee and Madison sustained these signature wounds. Sadly, they were slit from ear to ear twice. Their throats were slit twice post mortem. So we need to think about these injuries from a couple different perspectives. Does this suggest, obviously, that both ladies were targeted, not just one? And what is the symbolism of these injuries themselves? What was it that the perpetrators were they trying to send a message by inflicting these wounds post mortem? Did Kaylee and Madison know their attackers? Did they know too much? Were they talking about something? What is the symbolism and the messaging? Oftentimes, with injuries like these, it demonstrates that the perpetrators were trying to intimidate others and send a message to others about these attacks. If you talk or you say something, this is what's going to happen to you. I'm not saying that that's what happened in this instance, but oftentimes with injuries like that, there's a symbolism or messaging that's being sent by the perpetrator. And then we can go down to Xana and Ethan's attack. And the thing that stood out the most to me were the injuries to their lower extremities. And that suggests to me specifically they were trying to immobilize and neutralize, especially Ethan, as a physical threat. Again, we know that Kelly and Madison, the blood evidence clearly suggests that Kelly and Madison were attacked and ended in their bed. So it would appear that at least a couple assailants went up to that bedroom immediately to contain and control those ladies. And then simultaneously, the blood evidence also suggests that Xana and Ethan were initially attacked in their bedroom, immobilized. We know that Ethan remained in the bed for the duration of his attack. And Xana, although her attack was quite extensive, 67 stab wounds, that her attack was fairly contained also to the west end of her bedroom. Again, we have to start to think about all of this physical evidence and the planning and the premeditation. And does the physical evidence itself suggest a solo random attack, or does it rather suggest a targeted attack of these four victims? And then you pair that with that 1112 King audio, and I've said it, there's a group of people there in that home at that time that seemed very, very upset with these four victims. So we have to again start to collect all of this intel and this data. And what is it telling us about these attacks? Targeted attack or a solo attack? I know which way it's going for me. Another dimension of these attacks that we need to think about is the overkill. These were extremely vicious and brutal attacks on each and every victim. We're talking over 150 stab wounds for four victims. That in itself would suggest very personal, very retributive. These were described as rage kills. So that in itself, again, suggests something more targeted in nature rather than a random thrill kill. In terms of special treatment, it would appear that Miss Gonsalves got the worst of it. Miss Carnodal's attack was also fairly extensive. That could be that she was the one that fought back most vigorously. But again, the savage nature of these attacks, the multiple weapons used on Ms. Gonsalves, all of this points in one direction for me. Doesn't seem like a random thrill kill that somebody went and just picked this house randomly one night. Seems very targeted, very premeditated, very planned, and very personal. In terms of a couple more things that happened to these victims after the attacks, we have to talk about the posing, as uncomfortable as it might seem. We do know from this book that those three ladies, all three of them were found with their legs spread, and we know Ethan was naked. So that was very shocking and appalling for me to hear. But again, this is the forensic reality of these crimes, and we need to talk about this as heinous and as uncomfortable as it is, because again, what does this tell us about these alternate perpetrators? That doesn't sound like a characteristic of the attack. As we know, Mr. Koberger, the prosecution and the defense both agreed that there was no sexual motivation. So what is this telling us, this posing of these victims after these crimes? It lends itself to victim degradation, but also some type of messaging, some type of intimidation to others. Whatever these victims did, there was clearly a group of people in that home in the 2 a.m. hour that were very upset with them. And lastly, let's talk about the covering of the victims. We know that after the posing of Kaylee and Madison, Dr. Turvey alleges that someone pulled a comforter over both ladies. And then down in Xana's room, we know that Xana was found on the floor, but it did appear that somebody put a pillow behind her head. We also know that it appeared that somebody covered Ethan's leg wounds with a blanket. So again, what is this telling us about the alternate perpetrators? It seems like the victims knew who was attacking them, and there were people thereafter that covered these victims almost to cover up the wounds themselves, possibly a consciousness of guilt. So again, we need to start talking about and thinking about all of this collective intel, everything that we've talked about today, from the number of assailants to the number of weapons to the timing and the premeditation and the planning, this blitz type of formation and attack, these separate contained attacks, the signature wounds, the immobilization, the posing, the covering, all of that points in one direction for me personally, that being a targeted and systematic attack on these four victims, not a random thrill kill. And did these victims know their attackers?